It was Christmas Day, just after 2 in the afternoon, when I pulled into my own driveway. I'd spent the morning at the sunrise service at church, then had a quiet breakfast with my friend Martha. I'd called my son, Kenneth, twice. Both times it went straight to voicemail. I figured they were just having a late morning, maybe opening presents. I smiled, thinking about the gifts I had in the trunk for them and for Annette's father. I turned the key in the lock, pushing the door open. "Hello? Merry Christmas, everyone." The silence that hit me was immediate and cold. The house was still. No Christmas music playing, no smell of a turkey roasting. The tree in the living room was dark, none of its little white lights twinkling. My son Kenneth always loved those lights. And then I saw him, sitting in his wheelchair by the dining room window, just staring out at the gray sky. It was Annette's father, Mr. Gable. "Mr. Gable?" I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "Merry Christmas. Where is everybody?" He turned his head slowly. He's a quiet man, has been ever since his stroke, but his eyes were clear. He just shrugged one shoulder and pointed a finger toward the kitchen. A knot started to twist in my stomach. It's a feeling I've come to dread, the one that tells me something isn't right. I walked past the dark tree, my coat still on, and went into the kitchen. There it was, a single white envelope propped up against the coffee maker. My name, Josie, was scribbled on the front in Annette's perfect, loopy handwriting. I pulled the single sheet of paper out. It wasn't a Christmas card. "Mom, it started." I hated when she called me that. Had the most amazing, spontaneous opportunity pop up. A last-minute cancellation for a cruise to the Caribbean. We just couldn't pass it up. "We're flying out today, Christmas Day. Can you believe our luck? We'll be back in 3 weeks. Everything you need for Dad is on the counter. Thanks, you're a lifesaver." It was signed, Ken and Annette. I read it again, and a third time. My hands started to shake. The Caribbean, a spontaneous opportunity. 3 weeks. I looked at the counter. Sure enough, there was a pill organizer and a typed list of instructions and emergency numbers. All for her father. They were gone. My son and his wife. On Christmas Day, they had packed their bags, called a taxi, and flown to a beach, leaving me here with a man I barely knew. There was no "Merry Christmas, Mom." No, "We're sorry to miss the day." Just instructions. I walked back into the living room, the note crinkling in my hand. Mr. Gable was still looking out the window. He hadn't moved. "It seems," I said, my voice hollow, "that it's just you and me, Mr. Gable." He nodded, as if he already knew. I looked around the cold, silent room, at the dark tree, at the unopened gifts I'd left by the door just moments ago. They had been planning this. While I was at church, praying for my family, they were wheels up, heading for sunshine. They had left me alone. Worse than alone. They had left me to be a caretaker for her family, so they could escape theirs. The house felt huge and empty, and the silence was deafening. The holiday I loved most had just become a 3-week prison sentence. And the deepest, most painful realization settled in. They didn't just forget me. They replaced me. For the first hour, I think I just stood there in the kitchen, holding that piece of paper. The house was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Spontaneous. That was the word that kept ringing in my ears. Spontaneous. Kenneth isn't spontaneous. He's a planner. He's my son. I know him. He likes lists and schedules. Annette likes expensive things. I guess a spontaneous trip to the Caribbean fits her just fine. I finally dropped the note on the counter, next to her father's pill list. I took off my coat and hung it in the closet. I walked into the living room and plugged in the Christmas tree. The little white lights came on, but they didn't feel cheerful. They just made the room feel colder. Mr. Gable was still by the window. I asked him if he was hungry, and he just shook his head. I went into the kitchen. The refrigerator was full. Annette had stocked up on all of her father's favorite foods, special yogurts, cut fruit, little containers of pudding. But for me, there was half a carton of milk and some old eggs. They hadn't even left me a casserole. On Christmas, I made myself a piece of toast and a cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at Annette's handwriting. The shock was starting to wear off, and something else, something heavier, was settling in its place. It was a cold, sinking feeling of hurt. My mind kept flashing back. All the times I dropped everything for them. When their son, my grandson, was born, I stayed with them for 6 weeks, cooking and cleaning so Annette could recover, even though she had a perfectly easy delivery. I was the one who babysat every single weekend, so they could have their date nights. I was the one who co-signed the loan for their second car, because Kenneth's credit wasn't good enough. I always put my son first. Always. When he married Annette, I welcomed her. I bit my tongue when she made little comments about my furniture or my clothes. I smiled and hosted every holiday, did all the cooking, all the cleaning, just so they could show up, eat, and leave. I did it because I loved my son. I did it because I thought that's what a good mother does. You support your family. But as I sat there in that silent house, I realized it was always a one-way street. When did they ever drop everything for me? When I had my knee replacement 2 years ago, Kenneth visited once at the hospital. Annette sent flowers with a card that just said, "Get well soon." I had to hire a nurse to help me at home because they were too busy with work. Now it's Christmas, the one day of the year that's supposed to be about family. And they'd run off. They didn't just go to a friend's house. They left the country, and they didn't just leave me alone. They left me with a job. They left me to care for her father, a man I had no obligation to. The confusion started to turn sour in my stomach. Was I really so unimportant to them? Was my own son so wrapped up in his wife that he couldn't even make a phone call? "Hey, Mom, we're leaving the country on Christmas. Is that okay?" I looked at the pill list. Morning, noon, night. Blood pressure, blood thinner. Another one I couldn't pronounce. This wasn't a spontaneous trip. You don't just spontaneously arrange for 3 weeks of elder care. They must have been planning this, which means they lied. They knew all along they were going to do this. That's when the real pain hit. It wasn't just forgetfulness. It felt calculated. It felt like they saw me, Josie, not as a mother, but as a solution to their problem. A convenience. A free live-in nurse so they could go sip cocktails on a beach. I was just the help. And that hurt more than anything. The day after Christmas was even worse. The holiday was over, and all that was left was the long, gray stretch of days ahead. 3 weeks. 20 more days of this. I woke up on the 26th feeling like I had a stone in my gut. I lay in their guest bed for a few minutes, just listening to the quiet house. I tried to tell myself to make the best of it. I'm a capable woman. I can handle this. I'll be kind to Mr. Gable. I'll keep the house tidy, and I'll just get through it. I got up, put on my robe, and went to the kitchen to start the coffee. I looked at Annette's typed-up list. 8 a.m., wake Dad. Assist with morning routine. 8:30 a.m., prepare breakfast. Oatmeal with berries, toast cut into quarters. I sighed, poured myself a coffee, and went to his room. I knocked softly. "Mr. Gable? It's Josie. It's 8 o'clock. I heard a small grunt, so I opened the door a crack. He was already awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, putting on his socks. I stood there for a second, surprised. The list made it sound like I'd have to practically lift him out of bed. "Oh," I said. "Good morning. I see you're up." He just nodded, pulling the sock up. "Morning." "Well, I was just about to make your breakfast. Annette's list says oatmeal and toast." "Oatmeal's fine," he said, his voice a bit gravelly. "I can get the toast." "Oh, no, you just get yourself ready. I'll take care of it." I went back to the kitchen, feeling a little confused. I made the oatmeal and was just about to butter the toast when he wheeled into the kitchen. He bypassed the table and went straight to the counter, taking the butter knife from my hand. "I like to do it myself," he said, not unkindly, "like my toast hot." He spread the butter and then used the knife to cut the toast, not into little quarters, but just in half, like a normal person. I just stood there and watched him. The list said, "Assist with medication." He wheeled over to the pill planner, popped open the Tuesday a.m. compartment, shook the pills into his hand, and tossed them back with his orange juice. All before I could even open my mouth to offer help. For the next 2 days, this kept happening. The list would say one thing, and I'd see another. Annette's list said, "He needs help transferring from his wheelchair to the recliner." But on Tuesday afternoon, I watched him wheel himself right up to the chair, put his hands on the armrests, and stand himself up. He was a little unsteady, sure, but he did it. By himself. He sat down, grabbed the remote, and turned on the television. The list said he prefers his lunch to be cut into small, manageable pieces. I made him a sandwich, and as I was reaching for the knife, he just picked up the whole half and took a bite. A new feeling, colder and sharper than the hurt I felt on Christmas, started to creep in. I was being played. I looked at that list again. This wasn't a helpful guide. This was a script. Annette hadn't written this list for him. She'd written it for me. She had deliberately exaggerated his needs. She painted a picture of a frail invalid who needed round-the-clock assistance. Why? The answer hit me like a slap. To justify their trip. To make it seem like they were so overwhelmed, so burdened that this spontaneous trip was a desperate escape. And to make sure I felt too busy, too obligated, and too necessary to be angry. They weren't just leaving me with a task. They were inflating the task to cover their tracks. They must think I'm a fool. That I'm some old woman who would just read a list and blindly follow it without noticing the man sitting right in front of me. This wasn't neglect. It was manipulation. They had to know I'd see the truth. Did they just not care? Or did they think I was too much of a doormat to ever say anything? That I'd just quietly clean up their messes, like I always have? The betrayal I felt before now had an edge. It wasn't just that they'd left me. It was that they'd lied so thoroughly to do it. It was the 1st of January, New Year's Day. I'd been in that house for a full week. Mr. Gable and I had watched the ball drop on TV the night before, me with a cup of tea, him with a small glass of ginger ale. We didn't even say Happy New Year to each other. We just nodded and went to bed. The whole thing felt like a bad joke. I'd stopped following Annette's list days ago. Mr. Gable and I had found our own routine. He'd get himself up, I'd make the coffee, he'd make his toast. We'd watch the news. He was actually quite pleasant when he wasn't being treated like an infant. We didn't talk much, but it was comfortable. The anger at the lie, though, was still sitting right under my skin. That afternoon, I decided to do a load of laundry. I went into their master bedroom to strip the sheets, and I figured I'd tidy up the surfaces. Kenneth and Annette were both messy, leaving papers and cups everywhere. On Kenneth's bedside table, under a stack of old magazines, was a thin folder. I picked it up to dust under it, and it fell open. A single sheet of paper, stapled to a travel confirmation, slipped out. It was an email. My eyes scanned it before I could even tell myself to look away. The subject line was, "Christmas Getaway Final." It was from Annette, sent to my son's work email. I saw my name. I sat down on the edge of their unmade bed, and I started to read. Ken, it said, I'm booking the cruise. I've attached the confirmation. This is perfect. 3 weeks of sun and 0 family drama. The timing couldn't be better. My stomach tightened. I read the next line. I'll pick up all of Dad's supplies this weekend. All you need to do is write that care list for your mom. Just really play it up. Make it sound like he needs constant help. You know, assist with all mobility, must have food cut, very forgetful. If she thinks he's a total handful, she'll just be focused on that and won't have time to be mad about us leaving. It's the perfect solution. She gets to feel needed, and we get a vacation. Win-win. My hands were shaking. I wasn't meant to see this. This was their private conversation, but I couldn't stop. I looked for Kenneth's reply. It was right below hers. Got it. I'll write the list tonight. Good thinking. She'll be fine. She's always fine. She's always fine. I felt the blood drain from my face. I read it again and again. He didn't just agree to it. He didn't just go along. He was an active part of the lie. He was the one who wrote the list. He, my son, had deliberately misrepresented this poor man in the other room to manipulate his own mother. All the love, all the sacrifices, all the years I put him first, it all just shriveled up in that one moment. This wasn't a last-minute trip. This wasn't a spontaneous opportunity. This was a cold, calculated plan. They had a problem, 2 inconvenient parents, and they found a solution. Use one to take care of the other. I wasn't a mother. I was a tool. A win-win. The hurt from Christmas Day was a dull ache. This was a sharp, deep cut. I felt myself go cold all over. I looked at the email, at my son's words, and all the confusion and sadness I'd been feeling for the past week turned into something else. It was a kind of clarity. A hard, cold, angry clarity. I carefully placed the email back in the folder and put the magazines on top of it, exactly as I'd found them. But not before I took my phone out of my pocket. I opened the camera and I took a clear, sharp photograph of the entire email exchange. I stood up from their bed. I was no longer just counting the days until they came home. I was preparing for them. They were going to return, tanned and rested, expecting to find the same old, accommodating Josie. They were going to be very, very surprised. I walked out of their bedroom and slowly, quietly closed the door. The shaking in my hands was gone. All that sadness I'd been carrying around for the past week, all the hurt, all the confusion, it just evaporated. And in its place was something cold, hard, and perfectly clear. I wasn't Josie the victim anymore. I wasn't Mom, who would just be fine. I was just done. I was done being the convenient, reliable, old doormat they wiped their feet on. I went back to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, and sat down at the table. I looked at the photograph on my phone of that email. Win-win. Annette had written, she gets to feel needed. That line, more than anything, is what lit the fuse. The arrogance, the pity. They didn't just use me. They felt smug about it. My mind was racing. What now? Just sit here and wait. For 2 more weeks. The thought of packing my bags and just leaving crossed my mind. I could call a cab, go home, and leave Mr. Gable here by himself. But no, that's what they would do. It wasn't his fault his daughter was a piece of work. And besides, if I left, they'd twist it. They would come home, find him alone, and tell the whole world that I was the one who abandoned an old, sick man. I would be the villain. No, I was going to stay. But I wasn't going to be quiet. That afternoon, while Mr. Gable was napping, I called Martha. I'd told her they'd left me, but I hadn't told her the details. Martha, I said, you're not going to believe this. I sat at the kitchen counter. The one where they'd left that insulting note, and I told her everything. I told her how Mr. Gable wasn't at all as they described. And then I told her about the email. I read it to her, word for word. Martha was silent for a full 10 seconds. When she finally spoke, her voice was like ice. "Josie Davis," she said, "you are not going to let this stand. You are not going to be sitting there with a pot roast in the oven when those two spoiled brats walk in the door." "I'm not," I said. My voice sounded different, even to me, firmer. "Good," she said. "Don't get sad. Josie, get prepared." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to wait for them," I said, "and I'm going to have a talk with my son. But this time, I'm bringing receipts." After I hung up, I went straight to the junk drawer. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. I sat down at the dining room table, and at the top of the page, I wrote evidence. The first thing I wrote was the email, photo on phone. But that email was just the proof of this lie. It was time to document all the other lies. All the other times, I was the solution. I started making a list. Number 1, the $5,000 loan for their down payment in 2019, never paid back a single penny. Number 2, co-sign for Annette's car in 2022, the one I know they've missed 2 payments on because the bank called me. Number 3, babysitting. Every Friday night from 2020 to 2022, never once offered to pay, canceled my own plans. Number 4, my niece surgery. Kenneth visited once for 20 minutes. Annette sent a generic get well card. The list kept going. I filled the whole page. Every time I had swallowed my pride. Every time I had given when they just took. Every time I had been the good mother while they were being selfish children. I had mistaken my silence for patience. I had mistaken their using me for them needing me. For the next 2 weeks, I was a woman on a mission. The routine with Mr. Gable was easy. But when he was resting, I was working. I went into Kenneth's home office. I found the file for the car loan. I took a picture of my signature on the cosigner line. I used their computer, logged into my own bank account, and found the wire transfer for that $5,000. I took a picture of the confirmation. I was no longer a victim. I was a prosecutor building her case. They were due back in 5 days. They were expecting a warm welcome. They had no idea I was waiting for them at the defense table. It was the 14th of January, a cold, gray Tuesday. 3 weeks to the day since Christmas. I had Mr. Gable's 2 suitcases packed and sitting by the front door. The house was spotless. I'd washed all their sheets, cleaned the bathrooms, and even vacuumed. I wanted them to walk into a perfectly normal-looking home. I'd made a fresh pot of coffee and was sitting at the kitchen table, calm as a lake. The legal pad with my list was in my handbag, right next to my phone. Mr. Gable was quiet, watching a game show. We hadn't talked about the email. It wasn't his burden to carry, but he knew something was different. The air in the house was tight, like a string pulled thin. At 3:15 p.m., a car door slammed outside. "They're here," I said. Mr. Gable just nodded and turned off the TV. The front door burst open. "We're home." Annette sang out. They walked into the living room, pulling their wheeled suitcases. They were both deeply tanned. Annette was wearing a new straw hat, and Kenneth had a bright pink t-shirt on. They were laughing about something, still in their vacation bubble. "Mom," Annette said, dropping her bag. "You're a lifesaver. The place looks amazing. Did Dad behave himself?" Kenneth smiled at me, a little awkwardly. "Hey, Mom, thanks for, holding down the fort." I didn't get up. I just looked at them. The smiles on their faces started to fade. They weren't getting the warm, welcome home hug they expected. "Hello, Kenneth." "Annette," I said. My voice was even. Mr. Gable's bags are by the door. Annette's head tilted. What's wrong? You sound weird. Sit down, I said, motioning to the chairs at the dining room table. Mom, we just got home. We're exhausted. Kenneth started. I'm not asking. Sit down. The tone in my voice finally cut through their suntan. They looked at each other, confused, and slowly sat down. Mr. Gable stayed in his chair, a silent observer. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment. How was your spontaneous trip? I asked. It was amazing, Annette said, her eyes narrowing. Mom, what's going on? That's good. I'm glad you had a good time. I said, because while you were gone, I found this. I took my phone out of my pocket, opened the photos, and slid it across the table. It was the picture of the email. I watched them. I watched Annette's eyes skim the screen, and I saw the moment her blood ran cold. She snatched the phone up, her face turning white under the tan. Kenneth leaned over to read it. His face didn't go white. It went a blotchy, terrible red. He couldn't look at me. You went through our bedroom? Annette stammered, trying to find her footing. You went through our private things. You left me here for 3 weeks to take care of your father based on a lie. I said, my voice is cold and clear as glass. You abandoned me on Christmas Day. I think that gave me the right. You called me a win-win, Annette. You said I get to feel needed. Mom, Kenneth whispered. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? I snapped, and for the first time, my voice rose. Was it not like that? She's always fine. That's what you wrote, Kenneth, my son. She's always fine. And you were right. I was always fine. I reached into my handbag and pulled out the legal pad. I slapped it on the table. I was fine when I gave you $5,000 for your down payment, wasn't I? A loan that you never mentioned again. Kenneth flinched. I was fine when I co-signed for that car of yours, Annette. I went on, and I was certainly fine when the bank called me last month because you'd missed 2 payments. Annette's mouth dropped open. I was fine babysitting every single weekend, so you could have date nights. I was fine when I had my knee replaced, and you visited me once for 20 minutes. I've always been fine. I've been your fool, your doormat, your perfect solution. I pointed at Mr. Gable. But this was a new low. You didn't just lie to me, you lied about him. You painted a picture of a helpless old man to manipulate me, to make sure I was too busy to be angry. You didn't just abandon me. You plotted it. You used me like I was a service you were entitled to. They were both silent. Annette's mask of indignation was gone, replaced by a pale, cornered look. Kenneth was staring at his hands on the table, the picture of shame. I stood up. The showdown was over. There was nothing left to say. Annette, your father is ready to go. You can take him home. I picked up my handbag and my coat. Mom, wait, Kenneth said, his voice cracking. Where are you going? I looked at my son. Home, I said. I'm going home. You two have a good night. I walked out the front door, right past them, and didn't look back. When I pulled my own front door shut behind me, the click of the lock sounded like the period at the end of a very long, very ugly sentence. I stood in my own hallway for a moment. It smelled like my perfume and the lemon polish I like. It was safe. It was mine. I had walked out of their house without a single tear. All the way home, my hands were steady on the wheel. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I felt hollow, emptied out. The adrenaline from the confrontation was gone, and all that was left was this strange, quiet ache. It wasn't the fiery anger from the past 2 weeks. It was the cold, bittersweet sadness of an ending. I had just blown up my relationship with my only son, but I knew deep in my bones I had no other choice. I made myself a cup of tea, using my favorite mug, and sat in my own armchair. The house was so quiet. It was just after 4 p.m. I looked at the little clock on my mantel. I gave it 1 hour. At 5:15 p.m., my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Kenneth. I let it ring 3 times before I picked up. I didn't say hello. I just waited. Mom. His voice was shaky. He sounded like a little boy. Mom, you can't be serious. You just walked out. I could hear Annette in the background. Her voice was sharp, defensive. She had no right. Ken, she's twisting everything. I heard him say, Annette, be quiet. Then back to me. Mom, look, we were sorry. Okay? We're sorry about the trip. It was a stupid idea. We needed a break. A break, I repeated. My voice was flat. A break from what, Kenneth? From your responsibilities? From your father-in-law? From me? It wasn't like that, he insisted, and the weakness in his voice was making me angry all over again. Stop lying, I said, and my voice was so cold it surprised even me. The lying is over. I read the email. I saw the list. I know exactly what it was. It was a win-win. You got a vacation, and I got a job. You just forgot to pay me. Mom, I'll pay you back, he said, scrambling. The money for the down payment, we can start paying you back. We'll set up a plan. No, Kenneth, you're not listening. I don't want your money. I'm not your creditor. I'm your mother. Or, at least, I was. Don't say that, he cried. That's not fair. Fair. I finally let out the breath I felt I'd been holding for 3 weeks. You want to talk about fair? Fair is you and your wife handling your own business. Fair is you not using your 68-year-old mother as a financial safety net and a free nurse. So here's the new boundary. Kenneth, you will take my name off that car loan. I want written proof from the bank that I am no longer associated with it. Until I have that in my hand, you and I have nothing else to talk about. Mom, that could take weeks. I don't know if. That sounds like your problem, son. Not mine. You're a grown man. You're a husband. Handle it. So that's it, he asked, his voice cracking. You're just cutting us off. No, I said, and the sadness came back, sharp and sudden. You cut me off, Kenneth. You cut me off when you decided I was just a solution. You cut me off when you wrote that lying list. You cut me off when you got on that plane on Christmas Day. I'm just locking the door. You already closed. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I just pressed the button. The silence that followed was total. It was done. I looked around my little living room at the pictures of my family. My parents. My late husband. A picture of Kenneth when he graduated from college, smiling and holding his diploma before he'd met Annette. My eyes rested on that picture. This is what it felt like to stand up for myself. It was awful, and it was necessary. I realized, sitting there, how long I had let this go on. How many times I had bitten my tongue to keep the peace. How I had given and given, afraid that if I said no, I wouldn't be a good mother. I'd been so afraid of losing him that I had let him treat me like I was worthless. I had allowed it. That was the hardest part to admit. I had allowed it. But as I sat there, that cold, hollow feeling finally started to be replaced by something else. It was small, but it was warm. It was self-respect. It was bitter, and it was late, but it was mine. I was finally worth more to myself than their approval was, and that would have to be enough. The first few days were the strangest. My phone, which had been silent for 3 weeks while I was at their house, stayed silent in my own. I kept expecting it to ring, bracing myself for another pleading call from Kenneth, or maybe even an angry one from Annette. But there was nothing, just silence. It gave me too much time to think. I replayed that confrontation over and over in my head. Had I been too harsh? Had I gone too far? Every time that little voice of doubt whispered, I would close my eyes and see that email again. She gets to feel needed. And the doubt would vanish. I had done what I had to do, but the house felt empty. I was lonely. I had stood up for myself, but the price was the relationship with my only son. It was a bitter pill to swallow. I spent a Saturday just puttering around, feeling sorry for myself, feeling old and tired, and alone. On Sunday, I woke up, and as I was making my coffee, I looked at that picture of Kenneth's graduation on my mantle. I picked it up, looked at his smiling, hopeful face, and I felt a pang. But then I looked at my own reflection in the glass. I looked tired. No more of this, Josie, I said out loud. I picked up the phone. Not to wait for a call, but to make one. Martha, it's Josie. Are you free for lunch on Tuesday? My treat. That new cafe you wanted to try. Martha's voice was warm. Well, look who's back. I'd love to, Josie. How are you? Really? I am, I said, and I had to think about it for a second. I'm lighter, and I'm ready to talk about something other than my son. That Tuesday, Martha and I sat at that cafe for 2 hours. I told her what happened. She just nodded, holding my hand across the table. We talked about her grandchildren. We talked about a book she was reading. We laughed. It felt so good to just laugh. It was like a fog had lifted. I'd spent so many years wrapped up in their lives, their schedules, their needs, that I'd let my own friendships fade. That week, I called 2 other friends from my old church group. We made a plan to go to the botanical gardens. I signed up for a senior water aerobics class at the local YMCA. Things I wanted to do. Things I'd put off because I was always on call for Kenneth. About 2 weeks after the confrontation, a thick envelope came in the mail. It was from the bank. My hands were a little unsteady as I opened it. Inside was a lot of legal paperwork, but at the top was a letter. It was formal, but the message was clear. This letter serves as confirmation that you, Josie Davis, have been released from all financial obligations related to the auto loan for one Annette. I sat down. He'd done it. My son hadn't called. He hadn't apologized. But he had done the one thing I demanded. He had handled it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reconciliation. But it was respect. It was the first sign in years that he had actually heard me. I don't know what will happen with Kenneth and Annette. The holidays will be hard. Birthdays will be quiet. The damage is deep. Maybe one day he'll call, really call just to talk. Maybe he won't. But I'm not that woman sitting by the phone anymore. I'm busy. I have lunch with Martha. I have my swim class. I'm finding my own way. I learned the hard way that my worth isn't based on how needed I am by my children. It's based on how I value myself. And I will never, ever be a win-win solution for someone else's problem again. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I know so many of us go through things like this in silence. I have to wonder, have you ever felt taken for granted by your own family? What did you do? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them. And if my story touched you, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true life stories just like this one. You're not alone. Lastly, remember to download this wonderful book called Coming Back to Myself, 60 Liberating Truths to Find Yourself Again. You'll find it in the pinned comment below. Now, if you like this story, go ahead and click on the next video appearing on your screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revolt like you've never seen before on her Kindle Stories. Thank you for watching.